Okay, so let's finish up the notes on the 14 steps. So we've talked about plea negotiation, and I'm trying to get this to work. Okay, so there we go. It's coming up with a happy medium. We've talked about that. If one accepts a plea agreement, they know the outcome is guilty, and they know that the charge and the consequence are agreed upon. But if they take the risk and they go to trial, they're not guaranteed any outcome, and any plea agreement is off the table. So they could be found guilty, they could be sentenced to a higher sentence than they would have gotten in a plea agreement. So the plea negotiations is a critical stage. All right, we talked about voir dire, and again, voir dire is jury selection, and we talked about a summons being a court order to appear as a juror, and we also talked about striking for cause. There's a reason that information is made public, but race cannot be a reason to strike anyone, even for cause or in one of their peremptory, one of their limited number of strikes where they don't have to give a reason. And we know in Minnesota we have 12 jurors, and we'll always have alternates in case there's a reason that a juror doesn't make it through a whole trial. The alternate just steps into that position already caught up. All right, we talked about the criminal trial. Opening statements, the witnesses and the evidence, the cross-examination, objections, and closing arguments. So what's new is then we go into step 11. Step 11 is when the trial is all over, both sides have settled, they've given their closing arguments, and they're now going to go, the jury goes into a closed room where they will start the deliberations. So this is always done in private, and to convict someone in Minnesota, the entire jury, all 12 members, must be in agreement to convict someone. Okay, so for example, if there's a 10-2 split, the judge may say, we need you to go back in and see if you can't work with those two or figure out why there's disagreement. If they can't come back with a 12-0 decision for either not guilty or guilty, the case then becomes what's called a hung jury, and the judge would end the case, and then it would be the prosecution could recharge, but if they had that much struggle to get to a conviction, it may not be worth redoing the trial. If the guilty verdict is reached, they will move to step 12. It also means that if a guilty verdict is reached, that prosecution was successful. Because remember, prosecution has the responsibility of proving beyond a reasonable doubt, and if they come back with guilty, then the jury is saying to the prosecution, you were successful in convincing us that it was beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed the crime. If they come back with a not guilty, the defendant is released. The judge would literally say, you have been found not guilty, and you are free to leave. That then also means that even if new evidence comes up, the defendant can't be recharged because that would then be a violation of double jeopardy. It also means that not guilty is saying to the prosecution, you were not successful in convincing these 12 individuals beyond a reasonable doubt, and that the defense was actually successful in poking holes in your position, and it caused us to raise doubt. We go back to the Derek Chauvin case. They presented evidence that he had potentially lethal doses of drugs in his system, and that it's possible that in addition to what his body was sustaining by Derek Chauvin, that the drugs actually contributed to his death. And that didn't work, but it was certainly one of those things that the defense proposed to the jury The jury came back and said, no, actually, the prosecution's evidence was so convincing that we came back with a guilty verdict. All right, moving ahead, we go into a whole new phase. So the step 12 takes us into a entirely new part of the process. We do not have a defendant anymore. We have someone who's been convicted. And before they have a sentence, both sides are given a chance to talk directly to the judge. One of the biggest things that goes on is what are called victim impact statements. This is when family of the victim or the victim themselves is able to go in front of the judge and tell the judge, this is what this crime has done to me. And very often victim impact statements are meant to give the judge reason to go with a higher sentence. And when we talk about giving the judge reason to go higher, it is because of what we refer to as aggravating factors. Aggravating, if you think of a mosquito bite, and a mosquito bite itches and you continue to itch it, and at some point it bleeds. It's bleeding because you aggravated, you manipulated, you made it worse. If you'd have just left the mosquito bite alone, it would eventually stop itching and it would go away. But because you scratched it, you aggravated it, you made it worse. And that's what the hope is when we look at victim impact statements, is that they're going to bring out the worst of a crime and remind the judge. Again, trials can take time. They don't normally sentence someone the same day they're found guilty, so time has lapsed and the judge may need to be reminded. So if we're talking about aggravating factors in the Byron Smith case, the family would have pointed out that we went for 24 hours and didn't know where our kids were. They may point out that he moved the truck to make it look like he wasn't home. He set the kids up. Another aggravating factor could be that he shot them more times than he needed to incapacitate them. That he didn't call the police for 24 hours. I mean, there's a lot of aggravating factors. And the point behind an aggravating factor is to encourage the judge to go with a higher sentence. Now, there are also what we call, on the opposite side, we have the mitigating factors. So if aggravating factors point out the worst factors of a crime to get a higher sentence, mitigating factors point out conditions in which they might explain why the person convicted committed those acts. They're meant to ask the judge for leniency, maybe give lesser of a sentence. The idea that Byron Smith had been broken into 8 times. He had mental issues after having been broken in several times. It could be something to the effect of they may have trauma in their childhood. There may be issues of abuse that lead somebody to commit a crime. And the defense is going to try to present these to the judge to say, I'm not asking for no punishment. I'm asking you to take pity on this person and realize that there are more things going on in their lives than just the crime that was committed. So I want to show you a couple of victim impact statements that I think are really important. And one of these comes from the Jeffrey Dahmer case. If you don't know who Jeffrey Dahmer is, I'm surprised, but I would encourage you to look him up. This was out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I remember the day that they started bringing evidence, and I say evidence, quote unquote, out of his apartment. So let's see if we can.
Nutcracker Magical Christmas Ballet returns to Dallas.
And of course, we have to have an ad. Okay.
Hello, my name is Marilyn Sears. I'm the mother of Anthony Lee Sears, and I just wanted to know, just why would it be my son? I just want to thank Michael McCann for the good job he did. Well, you did a good job too, but I'm glad McCann won it. And I want to thank the jury, and I want to thank you, Judge. And just keep this man off the street, please.
So you see that she talked directly to the judge. She didn't give a lot of information, but she did say, it was my son, and she got emotional. And she's trying to get the judge to say, you have to go with the highest sentence possible. Now, Jeffrey Dahmer is in the courtroom at this point. The convicted does listen. So there's Jeffrey Dahmer, his attorneys. He is responsible to listen to the victim impact statements. He shows no emotion, considering he killed 13 men, and he was a cannibal, so he ate many of those men. This one is the one I always want students to see.
My name is Rita Isbell, and I'm the oldest sister of Errol Lindsay. Whatever your name is, Satan, I'm mad. This is how you act when you are out of control. I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you. I know. Jeffrey's out of control.
So what we're seeing, obviously he shows no emotion, but again, as we talked about in one of the other cases, it is the state's responsibility now that he's been convicted. He is a not property, I don't want to use that term. He is now the responsibility of the state, so the state of Wisconsin has to protect him. Much like that father in the one video we showed, security comes out of the woodwork. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 members of the security team right there. And then we got another one. And now they're moving him out. Okay, so we see how he gets moved out. Another one I want to show you is this little monster. This is a school shooter, and he is coming into court. He is being sentenced. Prior to this, the families of his victims that he shot and killed at this school in Ohio spoke to him. There were some that, I think there was one student who ended up being shot in the back, and he's paralyzed, and that mother spoke. And so what you're seeing now is right before the judge sentences TJ Lane, or anybody, they will give the convicted a chance to speak. So this is TJ Lane, and he comes in proper. His attorney is speaking with him, and as you're seeing this, TJ seems to be undressing. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So we're standing because the judge is coming in. Now, this guy here, you can actually see him. He sees what TJ's doing. And he'll kind of look around to see if anybody else is watching. So he looks there. Now TJ is down to his t-shirt.
with Prosecutor James Flake. Mr. Flake, could you please introduce your case?
Thank you, Your Honor. To my left is Nicholas Burrow, Judge County Assistant Prosecutor.
And yeah, you're pretty much correct. His t-shirt, he has written the word killer on the front of it. And he is going to give a statement here in a little bit. So I'm fast forwarding it to the point. So what we see here is his attorney is giving him some advice about making this statement and probably telling him this is what's legit, this isn't what you should do. And you'll see here quickly that TJ Lane does not follow that advice. Now he's looking directly at the families of those that were affected by this school shooting. And I will back that up. And I will put it into slow motion. Yes, it's going to sound very wonky, but I want you to be able to see and hear what he's saying. I don't know if it'll give me the captions, but we'll try. We'll see if this works or not. No, that didn't work so well. So we'll go back and I will tell you what he's saying in this. Let me get the captioning off, though. This is the hand that pulled the trigger, that killed your sons, that now masturbates to their memory. Yep, and that was his statement before the judge sentenced him to the rest of his life in prison. I don't know if I have any more. Allie Raisman.
Good morning. Thank you.
Allie Raisman is an Olympic gymnast who was sexually assaulted by Larry Nassar, who was the doctor, and she was one of the 200 plus women that came in and spoke directly to him. You saw him when the dad went after him.
Okay. ALEXANDRA Your Honor, thank you for the opportunity to make this statement here today, and thank you for providing the time and flexibility for all the other brave survivors to make their statement. Each survivor deserves to be heard equally. I didn't think I would be here today. I was scared and nervous. It wasn't until I started watching the impact statements from the other brave survivors that I realized I too needed to be here. Larry, you do realize now that we, this group of women you so heartlessly abused over such a long period of time, are now a force and you are nothing. The tables have turned, Larry. We are here, we have our voices, and we are not going anywhere. And now, Larry, it's your turn to listen to me. There is no map that shows you the pathway to healing. Realizing that you are a survivor of sexual abuse is really hard to put into words. I cannot adequately capture the level of disgust I feel when I think about how this happened. Larry, you abused the power and trust I and so many others placed in you, and I am not sure I will ever come to terms with how horribly you manipulated and violated me. You are the USA Gymnastics national team doctor, the Michigan and the United States Olympic team doctor. You were trusted by so many and took advantage of countless athletes and their families. The effects of your actions are far-reaching. Abuse goes way beyond the moment. often haunting survivors for the rest of their lives, making it difficult to trust and impacting their relationships. It is all the more devastating when such abuse comes at the hand of such a highly regarded doctor, since it leaves survivors questioning the organizations and even the medical profession itself, upon which so many rely. I am here to face you, Larry, so you can see I've regained my strength, that I'm no longer a victim, I'm a survivor. I am no longer that little girl you met in Australia, where you first began grooming and manipulating. As for your letter yesterday, you are pathetic to think that anyone would have any sympathy for you.
So she goes on. I looked it up. There were 204 victim impact statements given over 9 days in 2 counties, facing him directly, and also to ask the judge for the highest sentence he could get. So, and then we go on to step 13. Step 13 is the sentencing phase. So once all the victims and victim impact statements have been made, and the judge has given the convicted a chance to speak, then the judge will go into sentencing. And in Minnesota, we have a sentencing guideline grid, and I'm going to pull that up here. The standard grid, let me grab that for you. So what you're going to see in this grid is a number of things. Down the left-hand column are the crimes. So we got everything from fleeing a police officer to non-residential burglary to residential burglary to assault to aggravated robbery, murder 3, all the way up to murder 2. Now murder 1's not on here because that's a life sentence. We don't need this. Then what we look at, if we're looking at the crimes down one column, we also have across the top axes the criminal history score. So this is saying it's a first-time offender, and it tells the judge this is what by state statute it would be legitimate to give in terms of a sentence. Now, one of the things you need to understand is sentence lengths are in months in Minnesota. So if we're looking at 261 to 367 months, and we want to figure out what are we talking in terms of, so this 306 is the average. So 306 divided by 12, we're looking at 25 and a half years. So what you will also notice is that as you go and add on to the criminal history, that gets to be more and more and more. And so you can see based on months what we're looking at. This is when we look at the, well, both of them, they say presumptive commitment, presumptive stayed sentence at the discretion of the court. What that's referencing is that a judge has the ability, oops, I went one too far. The judge has an ability to work within those guidelines. A judge can say they're going to serve their sentences consecutive or concurrently. So say, for example, and I don't like that color, I want a different color. Let's do black. So say, for example, an individual is found guilty of robbery, they're found guilty of assault, and they're found guilty of fleeing a police officer. So we'll just put fleeing here. Robbery, that person gets 25 years. Okay, they're sentenced to 25 years. For the assault, they're sentenced to 10. And to the fleeing a police officer, they get 4 years. So when a judge looks at these multiple charges, oftentimes they'll go with the longest. And will say that the rest of the charges will be served at the same time. So when the judge says, you're going to do the 25 years, and do the assault and the fleeing the police officer concurrently, it means that as they do the 25 years, the 10 will be taken care of and the 4 will be taken care of. However, a judge could also say, I'm going to sentence you consecutively. So you're going to do the 4 years. Once that one stops, then you're going to start your 10-year. When the 10-year sentence is over, then you're going to start your 25-year sentence. So now we're looking at 4 plus 10, 14, plus the 25. Now we're looking at a 39-year sentence because they sentenced them consecutively rather than concurrently. Now, another thing a judge can do is, and I'm just going to erase this if that makes sense to everybody, they can do what's called an upward or downward departure. So if we go back to the grid, and I don't know how to get there with this, exit the drawing, that would have been smart, and we go to, and you see that in Minnesota we have a standard grid, we have a sex offender grid, we have a drug offender grid. So Minnesota has all these different grids that they can go by. So say, for example, somebody is sentenced to a second-degree unintentional murder, okay? And the judge looks at it and says, this person's never committed a crime, they're a law-abiding citizen, you know, they have struggled with what they did, you know, whatever the case is. The judge could look and say, and I'm trying this guideline, the judge could say, well, we can sentence you between 128 and 180 years. So we can confine you to a prison for anywhere from 10.5 years to 15 years. However, because of the extenuating circumstances, I'm actually going to do a downward departure where instead of giving you 10 years, based on these criteria and some of the mitigating factors that were brought up in your pre-sentence, I'm only going to sentence you to 5 years. Or they could actually do a different one where they go, the mitigating factors were so bad that by sentencing guidelines, we should, you know, you could go up to 367 months. 367 divided by 12 is 30.5 years, but I think that because of the mitigating, or excuse me, the aggravating variables that you know, tortured this person before, you lied to it, you fled the police, blah, 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 I'm going to actually go above the 367 and I'm going to do an upward departure where I'm actually going to give you 400 months instead of the 367. So judges can make those decisions. They can make those decisions because the guidelines are just that. They're just a guide. Doesn't mean that this is mandatory. And when you see the presumptive or the judge discretion, that's what this is, where the discretion is in the consecutive or concurrent serving or the upward or downward departure of the sentencing guidelines. All right. And then on to step 14 is the incarceration. So we've talked about imprisonment in Minnesota. You've looked at the prisons in Minnesota. How Minnesota works is that if you're given a 9-year sentence for something, and again, I don't mean you, I'm just saying that in how I present this. A person gets a 9-year sentence. They will serve 2/3 of that in prison. So they will serve 6 years in prison. The last 3 years of their sentence is on what's called supervised release. So they will not be in prison, but they will be supervised outside of prison. They might be placed in a workhouse. They might be placed in a minimum security facility. They may be placed in a treatment facility, but they may be going home, but they are being closely supervised for the remainder of that term. Now, some people will get this confused with parole and probation. Parole is when somebody has their sentence is still there, but they are released based on good behavior. We sometimes see that inmates will, they went through treatment, they've actually started helping people in prison, they become a spokesperson at treatment, whatever the case is. They may identify this as a reason for early release based on their behavior. Probation is in lieu, in exchange for incarceration. So a person may be found guilty of a misdemeanor and sentenced to 90 days in jail, but the judge may say, but in lieu of serving the time, I'm going to put you on probation, and for those 90 days, you'll have to meet with a probation officer and follow through on the conditions of your probation. Now, again, I want to go through these reasons because we've been through these so many times. Reasons we incarcerate is deterrence. We want people to see that behaviors are treated as criminal, and that people who commit certain behaviors end up incarcerated, and it's not a good thing, and then people will not want to, they'll be deterred from committing that behavior because they know that if they do that, they could go to prison. So they don't commit the behavior because they don't want to go to prison. We also see the incapacitation. That is when we take the person out of society. They may be unredeemable. They may have committed such a horrendous act that society is not safe with them back in, and so we incapacitate them. Retribution is prison to pay for what you did. You committed a crime, therefore you have to have a punishment, and that is retribution, and we're all familiar with what rehab is. So those should be the 14 steps. That should be the finalization that we've gone through in terms of the 14 steps. So if I don't know if I can do this. Yep, it's not going to let me do this. So we'll call this the end of the notes, and you can ask questions of me when you see me back in class. Thank you.